All right, let's dive deep. I mean, really, really deep. We're going on a journey to find the absolute foundation of what it means to be alive.
So, let me ask you something. Look down at your hand, or think about the tree outside your window, or maybe your dog napping on the couch. What are all these things? What are we really made up at the most basic level? What's the one thing that connects all of us?
You'd think the answer would come from studying something super complex, right? Like a human brain or something. But nope, the story, our story, actually begins with a simple piece of cork. Yeah, just a thin slice of bark from a tree. Okay, so let's set the scene. The year is 1665, and one scientist is about to stumble upon a whole new universe, a hidden world that no one had ever seen before.
This is what a scientist named Robert Hooke wrote. Using a microscope he actually built himself, he looked at that cork and saw that it was like a honeycomb, full of many little compartments. Now, that might not sound like a huge deal today, but you have to understand, this was revolutionary. This was the first moment in history someone realized that living things weren't just one continuous blob, but were made of tiny, separate units.
And what did he call these little compartments? He called them cells, from the Latin word for a little room. And that simple name, cell, stuck. It completely defined the fundamental building block of life, and it's a word we all still use, hundreds of years later. Amazing, right? Now, Hooke opened the door, but he was just the beginning. The story really snowballed from there. Just a few years later, in 1674, a guy named Leeuwenhoek peeks into some pond water with a better microscope, and whoa, he sees tiny, living, single-celled things swimming around. Fast forward to 1839, and a couple of scientists, Schleiden and Schwann, put it all together into the official cell theory. Everything alive is made of cells. Then, in 1855, another scientist, Virchow, adds the killer final piece to the puzzle. All cells come from other cells. This was a huge deal because it totally debunked the old idea that, life could just magically appear out of mud or something. Okay, so we found the little room. But what's actually inside it? Is it just an empty box? Not even close. Think of it more like a tiny, bustling city, packed with all these different structures called organelles. And every single one of them has a super important job to do to keep the whole city running. So, every city needs a city hall, right? The control center? In the cell, that's the nucleus. This is where the big boss lives. It holds all the chromosomes, which are made of DNA, and that DNA is the master blueprint for, well, everything. It tells the cell how to build itself, how to organize itself, and it directs every single chemical activity. It's the CEO. All right, a city needs power to run. And in our cell city, the power plants are the mitochondria. You've probably heard them called the powerhouse of the cell, and that's exactly what they are. They crank out this energy molecule called ATP, which is basically the cell's electricity. It fuels literally everything the cell does. Okay, so we have a city hall and power plants. What about factories? That's where the ribosomes and the endoplasmic reticulum come in. The ribosomes are like these tiny little factories that build proteins. And they're often found on the ER, which is like this massive network of highways and canals that processes those new proteins and ships them around the cell. What does every city with factories and highways need? A post office, or maybe a packaging and distribution center. That is the Golgi apparatus. It takes the stuff made by the ribosomes, sorts it, modifies it, and then packages it up into these little bubbles called vesicles. Then it's shipped off to wherever it needs to go, inside or even outside the cell. You know what else a busy city has? Trash, and you gotta have a sanitation department. For the cell, that's the lysosomes. These guys are the cleanup crew. They're basically little bags of powerful enzymes that just go around digesting anything that doesn't belong. Waste, invading bacteria, even old broken down parts of the cell itself. They keep things tidy. But here's a fun fact. If the cell gets super damaged, they can actually burst and, well, digest the whole cell. That's why they sometimes get the nickname suicide bags. A little dark, but effective. So we've had a pretty cool tour of this amazing cellular city, right? But here's the twist. Not all cities are designed the same way. In the living world, there are really two fundamental blueprints for how to build a cell. On one hand, you've got your prokaryotic cells. Think of these as simple, efficient little towns. Bacteria are a perfect example. Their genetic material just kind of floats around inside, they have just one chromosome, and they don't have all those fancy organelles we just talked about. Then, on the other hand, you have the eukaryotic cells. These are the sprawling metropolises. This is what you, me, plants, and fungi are made of.
They've got a proper nucleus to protect their multiple chromosomes, and the whole suite of organelles, the power plants, the factories, the post office, all working together in a super organized way. Okay, now here's where your mind is really going to be blown. Think about the most complex living thing you can. A giant blue whale, a towering redwood tree, you. Every single one of us started out as just one, a single cell. So how in the world do you get from one tiny cell to trillions of them all working together? It all comes down to the engine of life itself.
And that engine is called cell division. It's a pretty simple idea, really. New cells are made from cells that already exist. That's it. That's how we grow, that's how we heal when we get a cut, and it's how life itself continues.
And this process comes in two main flavors. First, you've got mitosis. This is basically the cell's copy machine. Its job is for growth and repair. One cell divides and becomes two perfectly identical daughter cells. Then you have meiosis. This one's different. This is all about reproduction. It's more like a genetic card shuffler. It creates 4 new cells, but each one has only half the genetic information, making them ready to combine and create a whole new individual. So here we are. We've gone from a simple piece of cork under a 17th century microscope all the way to the incredible, complex machinery humming away inside every one of us. And it all boils down to this one simple, powerful idea. The cell is it. It's the fundamental piece, the basic unit of structure and function for all of life. Everything you are, everything you do, happens first at the cellular level. And that brings us right back to you, the person listening to this right now. Your hopes, your dreams, your memories, everything. It all started from a single cell. Just one. So I'll leave you with this thought. You started as a single cell. What will you become?